Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be here with so many friends at the Manhattan Institute and to introduce the Hamilton Award winner and my fellow Wisconsinite, Paul Ryan. I'm especially pleased this evening because 2 years ago I introduced Paul at another event, and I mentioned to the crowd that I had known him for as long as 20 years, since I was a reporter in Washington and Paul was a young aide on Capitol Hill. And when Paul took the stage, he said it was true that we had known each other for 20 years, but he wanted everyone to know that he was a lot younger than I was. Now, I personally did not think that required any reinforcement, and Paul, tonight is my revenge. So I've searched long and hard to find something I could use against Paul tonight. I was looking for some story about an inflated political ego, some political betrayal of principle, or maybe cheating on that famous physical workout that he legendarily undertakes. I mean, come on, nobody in politics works out that hard. The problem is that finding Paul Ryan's dark secrets is not easy. As my boss Rupert Murdoch recently put it, Paul is the straightest arrow he has ever met in politics. And that may be something of an understatement. A son of Janesville, Wisconsin, he still lives on the same block where he was raised. His father died when he was 16, and as the youngest child still at home, he had to grow up quickly as his mother went back to school and to work. Believe it or not, he is popular with his staff and with his colleagues on Capitol Hill. He's an avid hunter, but to give the deer a chance, he uses a bow and arrow. But the worst thing I could find about Paul is that he actually likes the music of Led Zeppelin. There's another fan over here, I see. So my frustration built at really discovering only good things to say about Paul. And then I had an idea. I said, you know, I'm going to read the profiles of Paul Ryan in the New Yorker, the New York Times, the Washington Post, see what I can find there. And sure enough, I was able in those publications to find Paul's dark side. I learned, for example, that Paul Ryan believes that a free market economy provides the best opportunity for the most people to prosper. It's true. He really believes that. And that's not all. He believes in capitalism not because it might enrich those who are already rich, but as the best system for enriching those people who want to get rich. I know this is shocking stuff, but as a protege of Jack Kemp, he really does believe it. I learned some other scandalous things. I discovered that Paul believes that America would be better off solving its Medicare and Social Security liability issue now, today, before the baby boomers retire. That is, he wants to do it before it is much more difficult to do it, before my generation retires and before we have to cut benefits because we can no longer afford them. I know this is appalling foresight in a politician, but I want you to know it's true. I also learned, and I hope you are sitting down for this one, that Paul Ryan has been politically effective. This really did seem to especially alarm the New Yorker. When Paul Ryan first introduced his budget proposal called the Roadmap for America's Future in 2008, he had 8 co-sponsors. The next year, he had 14. The next 2 years after that, the House passed his budget with 235 yay votes. In 2010, Republican congressional candidates were told, don't go anywhere near the Ryan budget. In 2012, every Republican presidential candidate endorsed his budget, even Newt Gingrich. And President Obama was so alarmed that, of course, you remember his famous speeches where he compared the budget to being denounced it as un-American. Democrats thought they could use it to take back the majority, but they failed, and this year the Republicans passed that budget again. Now, I also learned, believe it or not, that Paul Ryan's willing to work across the aisle with Democrats. He persuaded Ron Wyden, the Oregon liberal, to work with him on Medicare and endorse a common Medicare reform. And he worked across the aisle this year with Patty Murray, the budget chairman in the Senate, to address government pensions and help the Republican Party avoid the further political damage from another government shutdown. For this sin, he has been called a member of the dreaded Republican establishment. Now, I'm not sure what the establishment is at this point, but I think in the case of Paul Ryan, it sounds like he's one of those people, Republicans, crazy Republicans, who actually want to win an election so he can implement the tax and the entitlement reform that he wants to pass. Finally, I've learned that Paul has spent the last year traveling around America, exploring some of the corners of poverty in the United States, some of its poorest neighborhoods. He asked the anti-poverty advocate Bob Woodson, a friend of his, to take him around to see what works and what doesn't work, what keeps people trapped in poverty, and what programs and character traits and assistance can help them get out. He hasn't allowed reporters to follow him on that trip, though some of us have tried to go along. But I know from Mr. Woodson, who's a mutual friend, that the whole point of this exercise is to find out what works, take it back to Congress, and then try to expand the programs that succeed and kill or reform those that keep people trapped in poverty. Pretty frightening stuff for Congress. So to sum up, Paul Ryan is a politician of steady convictions who also knows that you need to compromise to be able to get something done. He's well-liked enough by his colleagues that if he wanted to get the job, he probably could become the next Speaker of the House at the ripe old age of 44. He's proposed necessary reforms that have changed the debate within the Republican Party and are changing the debate in the country. And above all, he wants to go back to that day to promote faster economic growth so that more Americans can enjoy the fruits of this fabulous country and escape poverty, join the ranks of the middle class, or, God forbid, even become rich. Ladies and gentlemen, the scandalous Paul Ryan.
Thank you, Paul. Well, I'm the third Paul you're seeing tonight. The first Paul, singer, he's got the brawn and he's the MC. The second Paul, Gigot, he's got brains, he's the setup. I'm the politician. So I guess that makes me the punchline tonight. In all seriousness, I want to thank my longtime friend, that other Paul from Wisconsin, for his introduction. And I want to thank the Manhattan Institute. Thank you very much for this award. I very much appreciate it. The Alexander Hamilton Award. You know, when you think about Alexander Hamilton, his life is just one of those classic American stories. Orphaned at a teenager, doesn't have a penny in his name, lives on a tiny island, worked for a merchant, had a big hurricane that came, so he wrote a story about it in the local newspaper. It was an impressive story, gifted writing. So a group of businessmen that didn't know him took interest in him, they saw his potential, and they decided to pay for his education and send him to America. And the rest, well, as we say, it's history. It's a part of our country's founding history. You know, when you think about it, isn't that story basically a version of the American idea? The condition of your work the condition of your life, it doesn't determine the outcome of your life. However you're born doesn't determine how it ends. That if you work hard, you play by the rules, you apply yourself, you can reach your potential, you can flourish. That's the American idea. You know, nowadays, people wonder. We hear it all over. Are we still that country? Is that still even possible? Sure, the recession's over. Millions of people, though, have stopped looking for work. Yes, families are scrimping by, they're saving, but they're still falling behind. And America seems to be receding from its role and responsibilities in the world. And all the while, our national debt keeps piling higher and higher and higher. At times, it seems like this is simply insurmountable. We are less sure of ourselves today. And the world has noticed it. I just returned from a trip to Asia. And what do we see? We see China claiming disputed territories, reinterpreting the international norms in the maritime laws of South and East China Seas. Russia just invaded another country on trumped-up charges. And no one fears our president's displeasure these days. In Syria, the red line is washed away in the rush of events and equivocations. Our friends, our rivals, they're all watching this. And they are wondering, when the world is in a pinch, will America be there? Well, I think it will be. I think we can turn things around. I think we have all the makings for a comeback in this country. The seeds of regeneration are already taking place. Look, our list of to-do things is getting high, but all we need to do is to offer our countrymen a clear choice, win some elections, and apply those timeless founding principles to the challenges of the day. Look, if we get our policies right, if we just get the basics right, we can turn these things around. If we reform our tax code, we can get Americans back in jobs, and we can restore real, actual, honest, organic economic growth to the economy. If we replace Obamacare with patient-centered health care, so that people are in charge of their health care, we can actually bring down health care costs and bring more innovation to this sector of our economy, which has been dominated by a government takeover. If we unlock our energy potential, we can increase take-home pay and energy security and do a lot of good for our foreign policy. If we save Medicare by giving seniors more choice and control over their own health care, we can keep this promise to the current generation and to the next generation. And if we rebuild our military, instead of mindlessly cutting it, no one should question our country's strength and our country's resolve. If we balance the budget and pay down our debt, then we can restore our currency and we can put us back on a true path to prosperity. But here's the main reason why I'm so optimistic. I am optimistic because of the people of this country. The past year and a half have been wonderful. I have had this great privilege of going around this country into our poor communities, some of the poorest, simply to listen and to learn what it takes to actually fight poverty, to see good ideas and principles in action, You know, the way I figure it is, if we want to change the status quo, why don't we learn from the people who are actually changing the status quo? And when you go see people who are fighting poverty and doing so successfully, you're going to meet ex-gang members. You'll meet former drug addicts. You will meet people who just fell on hard times and are having a hard time getting back. But in the midst of all this adversity, people are turning their lives and their communities around. They are the heirs to Hamilton and the founders as much as anybody else in this country. Here's some of the things I've learned in these travels. And it's a list that's going to keep growing, the learning. The best bridge to a better life, it's a job. Work works. And that is why there is no substitute for real, actual economic growth and the pro-growth policies that inject growth into every facet of our economy and every corner of our communities. Not the sugar high stuff we see today, but real economic growth and real pro-growth policies. The best aid is personalized, it's customized, it's direct. And the best way to turn from a vicious cycle of despair and learned helplessness to a virtuous cycle of hope and flourishing is by embracing the attributes of friendship, accountability, and love. In fact, a lot of these stories that you will see in our poor communities are stories that look a lot like Alexander Hamilton's. Someone saw potential in another person, and they got involved. They didn't delegate it to somebody else. They saw a problem, they saw someone hurting, and they got involved and they helped somebody. They showed them friendship, they formed a partnership, they held each other accountable, and they helped a person rise. That's how you fight poverty. That's how you fight poverty. You fight it each person at a time, eye to eye, soul to soul. I'm going to keep learning about this. We are going to keep inviting this discussion because we want the circle of opportunity to be wider. And I've got to tell you, conservatives have a lot to offer. You know, one of the big inadvertent side effects, one of the downside effects of our vaunted war on poverty is it has reinforced this notion that this is government's responsibility. That great vaunted civil society that de Tocqueville talked about over a century ago can be better served by central planning in a government. And we've reinforced this notion that, you know what, I'm busy, I'm paying my taxes, yes, this is a problem, but that's government's responsibility, government will do something about it. That kind of thinking is not going to cut it anymore. Each and every one of us, and by the virtue of you being here and being philanthropic and civically minded, are doing something about it. But that kind of thinking has got to stop. And when you take a look at what's happened, we have actually isolated the poor. We have marginalized the poor. We have not brought people in and integrated them in our communities. This is a mindset that has to change if we're going to actually win this war. In addition, we've got to grab the policies that really do bring growth. And this is why I'm excited about what Manhattan Institute does. Go read Scott Winship's work, An Agenda for Opportunity and a War on Immobility. It's cleverly worded. Take a look at the ideas that conservative reformers have brought to this area of education with choice and charter. Let's take the same zeal, the same principles, the same enthusiasm, and the same dollars and the same involvement and bring it to other areas to fight poverty successfully. This is how we lay out a full spectrum conservatism that offers a real and complete vision to the whole nation. This is how we show a better way forward. This is how we speak to everyone, no matter who or where they are in life. You were all crucial in this effort. The two Pauls that were here this evening, Singer, Jagot, they are more than carrying their own weight. Jeb Bush is more than carrying his own weight. For years, the Manhattan Institute has been pushing free enterprise and a free society. You're making your mark, and your work is more important now than ever before. We are going to need your ideas. We are going to need your thoughts in this. So I simply want to say thank you for this award, and I will accept it as a down payment. Thank you very much, and have a good evening. Thank you.